On today's episode, Liz and I sit down with Dr. John Van Epp and discuss a healthier approach for dating and marriage. Dr. Van Epp is the president and founder of Love Thinks and is the author of several books, including his famous book titled How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk or Jerkette. He has previous experience as a founding church pastor, an adjunct seminary professor in marriage and family with extensive research in premarital, marital, and family relations. He also has worked as a clinical counselor for 25 years in his private counseling practice, and for over 20 years, he has trained military personnel and contracted with the military as a subject matter expert in relationship health, psychology, religion, suicide, and resilience. For the past 25 years, Dr. Van Epp has developed relationship programs that have been taught by over 35,000 certified instructors to over 1 million participants. He has been featured in The Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, Psychology Today, The O Magazine, and he has appeared on the CBS Early Show, Good Morning America, Fox News, and Focus on the Family. We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, friends, to another episode of the Stronger Marriage Connection. I'm Dr. Dave here at Utah State University, alongside Dr. Liz Hale, our licensed clinical psychologist. We are dedicating our lives to bringing you the best research and the resources and tips and tools to help you have the marriage of your dreams. Okay, I'm excited and so eager about our episode today. Dr. John is an author. He's a fellow podcaster. He's a clinical counselor. He's a church pastor, as well as the creator of one of the nation's most popular relationship education programs and books called How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk or Jerkette. He's also a good friend and colleague and partner with us on our Healthy Relationships Utah projects. He's been out and helped us on the Utah Marriage Commission. So I can't speak highly enough of Dr. John Van Epp. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, and thank you so much for having me. I look forward to this.
Yes, we are as well. Now, John, you continue to do so much. You and your daughter, Morgan, who we talked beforehand, that man, we've got to get her on, so we'll have her on it as well. We've had her do amazing presentations here for the Utah Marriage Commission as well, so we appreciate you making time for us today. Hey, can we kick things off by taking a step back, looking at the bigger picture? The internet has not only changed our lives, but it's had a particular influence on dating, right? Matchmaking services. Now there's all kinds of apps and programs and so much more. So what's your take on how the life partner selection process?
Well, I think if we want to take the really big kind of look at it all, we could go all the way back to about 80% of all societies several hundred years ago were actually engaged in arranged marriages where families were highly involved. So a lot of us in the freedom of the Western culture, would not want somebody, directing who we're going to end up spending the rest of our life with as a romantic life partner, right? I know I didn't want to back in the 70s when I met my wife, and we got married in 1979. So we've been married almost 44 years. It will be this summer. So it's been great life together, but I didn't really want my dad or my mom or anybody else to be navigating that whole process. But what they used back then to navigate the process was not just intuition. It was not just social status. There were family values. There were really quite a number of things, which as we became more and more individualistic, coming into the, 20th century, and particularly when you get into like the 1960s, and this was times when, we really wanted to be our own individual. We didn't want to be even associated necessarily coming out of the 60s. We didn't even want to be associated necessarily with the family upbringing. I'm my own person. And if you understand that whole movement, kind of away from the values of the unit, the kind of collectivistic values of giving and living for somebody other than yourself, and the emergence of the values of me as an individual. I want to find myself. I want to, have a relationship that fulfills me. And that's what's really most important. If you understand that kind of trend where, the balance, the scales tipped way more in the individualism than living for others, then you start to understand what really changed in the whole route from being, an adolescent to going into young adulthood to ultimately choosing a marriage partner. And we might say, for many, they just are thinking now, I just want to look around for a partner, somebody to spend maybe not even my life with, but somebody that I can spend some time with. So these transitions greatly changed dating. And then you get into really the 80s and 90s, and you start to see apps, eventually, but starting with websites that were to really help people in that process of choosing a life partner, where they weren't dependent on the family to guide the process, but they began to be dependent on the assessments in the app. So like, I don't want to mention any in particular, but they had ones that were all about compatibility, right? And these made literally millions and millions of dollars every month because people were so hungry for somebody to come alongside them and help them in the process. So, unfortunately, a lot of those, what we call dating apps, I prefer to call them meeting apps. Where to meet somebody, they were really used as, you might say, arranged marriage apps because they were, let's find the person that I can, spend the rest of my life with. As that began to evolve, more and more apps were about, let's just live in the moment. Let's not think about commitment. Let's not think about any type of partnership. Let's just find somebody to be with today in this moment. And, you have different apps. Like I said, I'm not going to mention any app names, but that really started to be really in the real time apps. I could be in a location. I could see anybody else that's on that app. I could, message them right there in the moment and maybe have some kind of a meetup right there. Some of those started to really lead this kind of movement away more and more and more. And I think there was many converging things, movement away from any kind of commitment. So let's not lock ourselves up. Let's not let's not nail anything down. Let's just meet up, see where it goes. Do you guys all remember Netflix and chill, right? So that that kind of came and went as a saying that was like, hey, let's not define anything about our relationship. Let's just see where let's just be together to the point where now we have what are called situationships. I don't know if you and your listeners have caught on to that one, but you ought to just do a little search on situationships, which are to say, hey, let's give a term to a label-less relationship, a relationship where we're not going to define anything. So this has led to a massive amount of confusion in the whole dating world. And I think, unfortunately, the move away from commitment was because in many ways it was thought, if I'm committed, I could get hurt. And I really think if we do a big analysis, particularly of late teens, 18, 19, 20, early 20s, all the way to into their 30s, the avoidance of really getting burned and hurt is a pretty powerful driving force for a lot of them. So they want relationships where they have low risk. But the problem is many times falling in love, if you don't have any definition and you're not talking about the relationship, falling in love still happens and you still feel bonded and you still start to form that kind of connection with somebody that when they break, their loyalty to you because there's no defined commitment, it is really devastating. We see all kinds of evidence of that in mental health. We see it in relational health and a lack of relational health all the way around. And we see it in suicide rates. So we just see a lot of kind of like the backfiring. So that's kind of a really big picture, bringing it to present day. And what drove me in the 90s, when I had a private practice. I had a counseling practice for just shy of 30 years. And something midway in that private practice was a turning point for me to go upstream and create something preventative. So I wanted individuals to have their own kind of personalized game plan for choosing a life partner, that rather than relying on an app or relying on something on the website or relying on family even, what do I need to know to be able to be the most informed and, you might say, the most proficient at being able to build a healthy relationship and have my head and my heart actually in harmony in the process and lower my personal risk. So I wanted people to have lower risk, but to do it informed rather than to try to do it by just avoiding commitment.
Gosh, I love that. Informed and proficient. I often will say to my dating clients in practice is get to know faster, right? Get to know that this is not a match faster. Don't just hang on, hoping things will get better or in the meantime, right? Until someone better comes along. I think we owe it. I think singles owe it to each other to let each other go and pursue other relationships if we know it's not a match. Would you agree?
Yeah, that getting to know was a big part of it. So back there in the 90s, I had my private practice. I was actually teaching advanced graduate studies in marriage and family assessment, marriage and family relationships, things like that. And I was coming across some research, which one of your colleagues back in that day was the only one that I really found working with some of this published research. And it was in a category that I called premarital predictions of marital outcomes. So what before marriage predicts an outcome after marriage. So usually we think of how to help married couples once they're married, but I was like, hey, let's go all the way upstream before they even choose somebody. What were some of the major predictors of somebody that they're interested in that would predict what they're going to be like 10 years down the road in a committed marriage relationship? So I began to collect these studies and started to organize them. And I literally found hundreds of published research studies and psychosocial research that had some element of predictability from something before marriage. And I found that they fell somewhat neatly into about 5 target areas or 5 categories. And that became the content of the How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk or Jerkette book, 5 different chapters on just what you said, Liz. What really do we need to get to know about somebody that will best foreshadow how they're going to treat me? Because how they're treating me in the beginning of a relationship is not always how they're going to treat me down the road. So, how can I be a good kind of wise predictor while I'm, falling in love with them and we're having a good time and we're just, having fun and relaxing and having a good time, but I want to be engaging discernment in the very process.
Cool. So there is getting to know someone, K-N-O-W, and then there's getting to know, N-O, where we are not a match, right? Both I think are so key. The media certainly plays a huge role in affecting people's thoughts and ideas about dating and romantic relationships. Do you get the sense, John and Dave too, that Hollywood has romanticized dating and partner selection, so it becomes more of a trusting in fate rather than trusting the process? What's your take?
Well, Dave, you can certainly respond to that too. I was flying home just recently, and I watched a movie about this whole area of fate. That fate plays, and the whole plot of the movie. It's a movie that's right out right now, but the whole plot of the movie is 2 people that already have a partner that they're intending on marrying, but they end up breaking off that engagement because fate brought them together. And that the whole idea is that you really don't have to engage your thinking, that true love has a mind of its own. It will find you, it will lead you, and it will establish that permanent, perfect, romantic love relationship. I think that's the theme of many movies, but I really do think those movies are more, rather than leading contemporary culture, I think that they are more kind of mirroring how people do think. Deep down inside, people think you know, I really shouldn't have to work at a relationship. If it's a good relationship, it doesn't require work. And when it comes to falling in love with somebody, I really need to let, the universe guide me to just the right person. I don't need to engage in anything. But that's so contrary to our whole history of forming arrangements and everything else. And it's even contrary to that whole big rush to go onto a website and to take an online compatibility test for that compatibility test to try to match me. If the universe is doing it, we don't need any of these things. But the reality is we need to be way more involved than this kind of romantic concept.
Yeah. Oh man, I couldn't agree more. And John, I would add that in the movies, it just feels like, if it just feels right, to be led this and not to be committed to this person. And then it gets physical so fast, which flies in the face of your relationship attachment model and kind of the stages and where we should go as we get to know each other in a relationship. So let me ask you this. Where's the balance then in things happen for a reason and as well as, all right, personal choice, or even trusting in a higher power, and I'm just going to close my eyes and let fate happen. How does one go about keeping the heart working together with the head, as you talk about?
I think, there's an older book that was out called The Tipping Point, and then later he wrote another book. Malcolm wrote another book about just kind of intuition and knowing things intuitively. What I really found interesting about that book that he wrote about intuition, I'm trying to remember if you can remember the name of that Malcolm Gladwell's book. It's on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, if anybody can remember the name of it, just tell me. But when you read it, the people that had the best intuition, which was kind of his argument, let intuition be a guide, were the people that had spent years and usually decades of study in the area that now they were intuitive. So like somebody that could look at a piece of art and almost intuitively, automatically, it's called blink.
Blink,
right?
Yep. The power of thinking without thinking. Yeah.
Thank you. And in the blink of an eye, they would know whether it was legitimate or whether it was fraudulent.
Wow.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
But the people that could do that were those that had studied art for, 40, 50 years. So what I would kind of parallel is intuition in choosing a life partner doesn't come from lack of knowledge or ignorance, or it is not born in you as some kind of magical thing. It is rather, if you would really kind of study the science of love and choosing people and having a good relationship, if you really have a fairly broad understanding of, I'll give you a couple areas here. So some of the 5 areas are, like, one is what somebody took out of their family background. Well, we're all products of the family we grew up in. If we either imitate it or if we tend to say, I didn't like what happened in my family, I want to do it differently, we still can understand a lot about this, 25-year-old, 35-year-old, or even 55-year-old person by knowing what they liked and did not like and what they took out of their family upbringing, what they revolted against and what they mirrored, what they wanted to repeat. Right? And we can also know a lot about their values. So the idea of getting to know somebody also includes hearing stories about their upbringing and what life was like and what they liked and what they didn't like, and kind of getting into that history. Well, I put in the book, how do you translate that into a dating relationship without interrogating somebody about their family? Well, I think it's possible to do. A lot of people like to talk about their family upbringing. I can just give you one example. So when I was growing up, my mom developed cancer when I was in junior high and passed away the very first day of my 10th grade in high school. And I was the youngest of five. I was in Northern Ohio. We lived on a farm. My dad wasn't a farmer, but we all loved the farm and animals. And my other four siblings were out of the home. Two of them were in college, and the other two were already married. And so it was really just my dad and I in this large farmhouse. And my dad was a World War II vet and was part of that greatest generation and wasn't real adept at talking out his emotions or being able to sit down and have a conversation about, mom that just passed away. So there was a lot of grieving on my own. So my dad, I'm sure, did some grieving, and he had known my mom since elementary school, and they had been kind of childhood sweethearts. And so it was a tremendous loss for him. They had a great relationship, but the way he managed is he threw himself into dating within months. And so there was this kind of strange thing of losing a key person in the home. My dad not really saying I love you or being real physically expressive with hugs and not being able to talk things through. And so very much alone. And then within months, new women coming into the house. And so by summer, he had met somebody, and within what I call the 90-day probation period of a relationship, okay? Before you really, like you were saying, Liz, before you can really know or say no,
Yeah,
with
that's right.
using both spellings of the word. My dad had met somebody, and after about 2.5 months, married her. And there was this, in that whole process, I can remember before that marriage took place, and in that kind of cold winter of Ohio, you all know in Utah, the cold winters, I felt that need to go to my father and try to actually engage in some kind of close moment of talking about our relationship, about mom, and I just thought I would start out by saying, Dad, I love you, because that really wasn't between my father and I. And I don't think it really happened between him and any of my siblings that I knew of, but it wasn't where he was comfortable, So it was this really kind of tense, awkward moment. And I can remember going to my dad. He was reading the newspaper in the living room. This was in the winter. He had not met what became his future wife yet, but he was dating. And I said, Dad, I'm going to go to bed now. And he looks over the newspaper and he goes, okay, John, good night. And I said, before I go to bed, there's just something I wanted to say. And then there's this, the pause that feels like a century. And I go, Dad, I love you. And he looks at me, and in this awkwardness, he goes, me too. And I can remember I just cut it short. I went to my bedroom, and it almost was humorous to me. I love my dad, and he loves himself too. He didn't say, John, I love you. He said, me too. And so it was like, I am not going to cross that line again,
Yeah.
And I can remember, after he got married, and she had 4 kids. There were 5 in my family. The whole kind of family shifted from kind of our family to now this blended family. And many people have had this experience, radically changed. I became very independent, had a lot of things go on. But the point is that I had an experience, thankfully, right when I was going into college, just before I graduated high school, heading toward college. That was a real life-changing experience. It was actually a faith experience. And it opened me up to being more expressive. And I think that it would have been, more likely for me to just kind of follow in the footsteps of my father. But what opened up was, express your love with hugs, give people, some kind of show, be more comfortable with saying, I love you to the people that you really love and care about. And that was not only a sign of the times in the 70s, but I think it was also a turning point for me and my family to say, hey, I want to, a lot of things I like about my dad, but I want to be a different kind of man in my marriage and family in some ways than my dad was. And I'm just using that as an example that when I met Shirley, who I've been married to now 44 years, when I met her, it was important for her to know how I was going to be similar or different than my father if she really wanted to predict. I mean, she could have that magic moment of being in love with me right there in that moment. But if she really wanted to know what I was going to be like, she needed to hear what experiences I had in my family background, what I was going to take out, and what I was going to revise. And was I being successful in revising it? That's just one of 5 key areas that I think make us much more discerning in the whole process of love and selecting a partner, and not just enjoying the moment, but being able to predict the future at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, beautiful. For those of us, those who are single, I have a really tender spot for singles, John and Dave, because I was older when I married. So it's near and dear to my heart. Those who are dating and in their heart of hearts, they really want marriage. They really want a committed relationship. Are there key things to look for? Either maybe red flags, green lights. What are your top suggestions, please, John?
Yeah, a lot of those green lights, we'll call them green flags and red flags. Okay. But a lot of them really do fit into the 5 areas. So I'll just tell everybody the 5, but if you really want to know more, family is one. But a second area that is very close to the family is how a person's conscience works. And if you just take a moment and you think about the conscience, that is our self-monitoring. So, we have a lot about EQ or emotional intelligence, the ability to self-regulate. When you get angry, are you able to keep your cool and manage things? And do you have situational awareness, right? These are all terms that really convey a function of what we would call this kind of conscience. So the conscience is like, when we say double-minded, I don't mean, you're confusing and you can't make a decision. I mean, you have one mind that's living life and another mind that is watching. So I'm kind of watching myself. We all do this, right? We start to get upset. We're in a conversation with somebody and we start to say something and something inside our head says, don't do that. Just put a lid on it. Don't say it. And some of us have the willpower to shut the mouth and others don't, right? And then later we regret it. And that regret later is also a function of the conscience. So the strength of the conscience can maybe help you to keep your mouth shut in the moment and regulate yourself a little differently, monitor yourself a little differently. But it can also help you to self-reflect later on and say, I shouldn't have said that. Or maybe I need to go and do something about it. All of these, aspects that are so important in a long-term relationship, how we resolve conflicts, how we handle a conflict, how we manage ourselves in the moment, are tightly woven in a converging experience in the functioning of the conscience. And even empathy, the ability for me to think, wow, I was just talking and, I forgot to ask somebody about something. Man, that probably made them feel invisible. Like they probably were hoping I had asked them about it. And my conscience steps out of my experience into another person's world and says, how do they feel? How does John look through their eyes? That functioning of the conscience is a key area to get to know. But if you think about dating, first of all, we don't have dating classes for the most part. Mm-hmm. Well, if Utah is teaching how to avoid falling in love with a jerk or jerkette, they have dating classes.
That's true.
Right? But a lot of individuals don't ever get any kind of education in this. But one of the areas that they need to be educated on is, how do I figure out the maturity and the functioning of the conscience of this person that I'm in a relationship with? Because how they're being conscientious toward me right here in the moment might be because they really like me and everything's exciting and new, but it may not predict the long-term functioning of their conscience that I'm really going to have to live with if I have a life partnership with them. So family, conscience, you can automatically begin to see where green flags and red flags. And then 3 other areas, I would say: compatibility potential, the compatibility of our personalities, our values, our lifestyle. Those are 3 major areas of compatibility. Then also just kind of their track record is another. You can really predict a lot about how somebody's going to act with you by just looking at how they treat everybody else. So their previous romantic partners, as well as maybe friends and family and coworkers and authority, and on and on. And then the last area is, of course, their skill level. How proficient are they at relationship skills? So those 5 areas became 5 chapters in my book and became what I called a drop-down box under getting to know somebody. And as you guys know, I put all of that into a relationship attachment model that had some other areas of the heart. So I said the head, these 5 areas to get to know, actually have to be balanced with the building of the heart connection with somebody, which that relationship attachment model helped to define.
Yeah, brilliant.
Nice. Nice. I love this. Okay, red.
It sounds like a lot of work. I'm imagining now my conscience is saying, oh, there's people listening there really like, oh, that's way too much work for me. The reality is that it really isn't. And it's what everybody is already doing
Yes.
anyway. It's just giving them some good information so that they feel more informed about the process of what they're already doing. So if you're thinking like, oh, I don't really, I got to get to know all this stuff about somebody. It's like, well, yeah, that's what's going to happen anyway. I'm just going to help you to have more definition. And I have a saying I've used for a long time. With definition comes implementation. Without definition, no implementation. So in other words, it's hard to do something when you don't know or can't define what you're doing. But as soon as you have some information, some good definition, it makes it actually way easier. It's just like driving the car. As soon as that GPS system is telling you where to go, you don't even think about it. You just relax and enjoy the ride. And with greater understanding, you can enjoy the ride of a romantic dating relationship way better.
I think quite just the opposite. You really simplified these 5 areas, I think, John, beautifully. We can't afford not to look at these 5 areas, whether we're dating or whether we are married also, right? We deepen those connections and that insight, that learning, that knowing about each other. Yeah.
It's
Excellent.
interesting. You would almost think that there is a devil in our culture working against the formation of successful relationships, romantic relationships. For example, don't judge me. We're not allowed to be judging. You're not allowed to judge anybody. And so that has kind of led to don't be discerning. Don't even gauge your head. Just, let fate lead you. Don't be intentional and thoughtful and involved. Well, I sat down for years in my when I had a counseling practice, I sat down for years and I just heard so many people say, I'm in a relationship and she's doing ABC. Should I be worried about that? And it's like they have no kind of like ability to make a good judgment of character. And they feel kind of guilty making any kind of discerning judgment. So it's almost like working against. If you sit down with somebody and you say, tell me more about your family, this whole kind of let's not be serious. Let's just enjoy the moment, have a good time and not be serious is really an anti get to know you process. And I think all of these things end up being, you might say, if you think of, wading through the water of an ocean, these are all like undercurrents pulling you in the wrong direction. It is good to get to know somebody. It's helpful to be able to have conversations where you kind of go a little more in depth. It's great to be able to really be thoughtful and discerning of somebody while you like them and are attracted to them. Because just because you're attracted doesn't automatically mean that you're going to have a good partner. You can get attracted to a sociopath. Okay. There are people that have major problems that we can be attracted to. So attraction alone, chemistry alone is not enough.
Yeah.
We need to be able to have the head and the heart work together.
Yeah. Let me ask you this then. That makes me think of this question. In your clinical practice, or if you've seen couples over the years, are the same types of issues, or do you see these new stresses and struggles that arise today?
It's a really good question. I do think in some ways there's nothing new under the sun, but obviously things change a lot. And I would say that with technology, with the phones, so maybe there was always something distracting somebody from their partner. The kind of the old image of the guy sitting there smoking his pipe, reading his newspaper while his wife feels neglected or something like that. Well, now, it's me on my phone, doing little searches, and it could be her on her phone, right? So, if the concept that we don't meet each other's needs is a concept that's been around for decades, centuries, millennia, then it just kind of changes with the changes in common culture and society and technology and on and on. So in some ways, David, I'd say yes, things are new. In other ways, it's really conceptually some of the same things just repeating themselves. That relationship attachment model that we were all talking about that can be used really for singles in choosing a partner can also be used for couples in being more thoughtful about their relationship. In the same way, even though we've been married 44 years, we need a common language to be able to talk about our relationship. And this is one very, very common problem I always saw couples have. They didn't know how to really connect in a non-defensive way, talking about the major areas of the relationship. That one might use language that the other one is like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like you say you just want to feel close and you want to feel in sync. And what more, we spent all yesterday cleaning the garage. How much more in sync? What are you talking about? And this ability to really be able to connect in a language, whoops, sorry about that on my microphone, connect in a language that makes sense to both of them was what I tried to put in that relationship attachment model. So if people would just kind of use their imagination and think of a board with 5 sliders that go up and down, how they know, trust, rely, commit, and touch. So starting at the left, how much I know somebody. That's really what I've been spending a lot of this time talking to you guys about, that singles need to have a drop-down box of key areas to get to know about somebody that they're interested in and thinking about having a relationship with. So those are those 5 areas. But based on what you know, that can help you define how far to go in trust. So it's a little dangerous to trust somebody way more than you know them. And then in some marriages, you know them a lot, which informs how to bring your trust down. Like, I know I can't trust you to remember to get what I asked you to get this morning. So I got to send you a few text messages throughout the day to remind you to do what I had already asked you to do. So my trust, my belief in you is not the same of what I know you. So as much as we want, getting to know somebody to lead how you get to trust them, how you can then depend on them or rely on them is different as well. So these become areas that are really important in a marriage relationship. Trust is a lot to do with my attitude, my belief, my respect of my partner, how they feel trusted, that I have confidence in them. Okay. How we communicate and talk and get to know each other. These can be areas that become great deficits. But I think that they are important areas to keep strengthening. We need strengthening, staying in the know. We don't want to feel like we're out of touch with each other. We don't want to have these bad attitudes where I hear your voice and immediately what comes to mind is kind of this ugly image in my head. Oh my gosh, what now? Those are attitudes of trust or mistrust. And then tons of books have been written about the needs that husbands and wives, that married couples have, and how two partners can have very different needs, and how we need to kind of like love languages, how we need to meet the needs of the partner according to what's important and significant to them. And that's rely. How can I really depend on you to be there for me and to meet my needs? And then commitment is the security of your relationship, how you're, backing each other up and supporting each other. And, if you think of the practical aspects of commitment, and then touch can be everything from affection to your sexual relationship. Know, trust, rely, commit, touch are categories, major bonds, but categories of our relationship that we need to pay attention to. And we use that model to help couples that have been in a relationship a long time to continue to actively run their relationship with their head and their heart.
Brilliant. I love RAM. I'm such a fan of RAM. I have been so for many years. We also like to ask our guests, John, pardon me, this particular question. What do you think is the key to a stronger marriage connection?
Well, I know you always want one answer. You're being so reductionistic. So I'm going to give you two, but they're based on what the conversation today has been about. So we spent the majority of time really talking to singles upstream about partner selection. And I would say the first is making sure that you really have a person that you're kind of equally yoked with. I didn't want somebody exactly like me. My wife has a very different personality than me, and that certainly was part of our chemistry. But I had somebody that had a similar conscience, somebody that we really had very similar values. We had a lot of things that were foundational and continued from 1977 when we first met to today. Okay, a long time, making me feel really old. But I guess I'm saying you better start in a relationship with the person that is going to really be somebody that you're happy with, and you'll have good times and bad times, and you'll have struggles, and you'll have to forgive. You'll have to work through issues, but you need to have somebody that you've selected with that partner selection kind of approach that you're going to really, you might say, feel very secure with going on into the future. The second is, I think married couples, if there is really kind of the secret sauce, it was that they would have a game plan for managing their relationship. So I would go to what we do is in sports with coaching. You gotta have a game plan. You just can't go out in the field and expect to win. You gotta have a game plan, and you gotta have huddles, and you gotta have team meetings. And married couples must have some kind of a fairly organized way to regularly run their relationship. That's what I have in my book, Becoming Better Together. It's the one takeaway for married couples, which is how to have regular couple meetings. We call them your couple huddle, where you can sit down and use that relationship attachment model as your game plan scoreboard. Where are we in our relationship? What do we need to do differently? If you can help couples to have this kind of somewhat formalized, regular sit down where they are not defensive, they're right on the same page, and they have a common language that they can talk about their relationship, then you actually spark a ton of spontaneity. Healthy spontaneity comes out of healthy intentionality. So it doesn't just happen automatically. By having that intentional meeting, you spark a tremendous amount of healthy spontaneity throughout the relationship. So having a couple meeting and having this formalized game plan would be how I try to help couples really secure their relationship. Mm.
I love the couple huddle. That's adorable. Yeah. It's going to make me smile all day.
Yeah.
Good.
We want people to have access to you as much as possible. Dr. John Van Epp, where can they go for more information about you and your resources, please?
Well, we have 3 websites, and that's because we have a lot of content. So
yes, you do.
For those that just want something to do at home, like take an online course or to get, we have a lot of different small products that they can get, very inexpensive. Go to My Love Thinks. So MY and then Love Thinks. So not stinks, Love Thinks. So mylovethinks.com. And you'll see that we have a blog and we have a lot of content. We've had a podcast. So there's a lot of materials. And you can also from there link to Dr. Morgan Cutlip, C-U-T, like a cut lip, Dr. Morgan Cutlip on her Instagram, and get content every day. So that would be for at home. If you are really motivated and you want to teach classes and you want to get, maybe a little more of a insider information, if you go to Love Things, all of our programs, the research behind our programs, and how to become certified in facilitating as an instructor any of our programs, all of that is on lovethinks.com, as well as a store with a lot of products. And then there's one last one I would just mention. There's a lot of people that are involved in churches. We do have all of our content we put into a 6-week church-wide series. The entire church, we have content for kindergarten all the way through adults, and we have small group video-based studies for adults, and we have messages that are transcripts that can be revised and altered. But it's a great 6-week series, and you find that on RAM, R-A-M, ramseries.com. And it's specifically there for churches. And there's like a short 4-minute video of 5 pastors nationwide that talk about putting on this series. It's a short video, but it gives you a great kind of introduction to what it could do in your faith community. So mylovethinks.com, lovethinks.com, and ramseries.com are the 3 areas.
And we'll put all those links in our show notes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, John. I might also add that if you're in Utah, you can go to Healthy Relationships Utah. We've actually partnered with John with his programs, and we teach a lot of those throughout the state for free. So if you want to check those out, healthyrelationshipsutah.org for more information about the classes that are offered and other classes offered across the state of Utah. All right, John, before we let you go, as we wrap up, we like to just kind of get your takeaway of the day. If you have one bit, one piece of information, not 2 like before, right? No, just kidding. If you have just one takeaway, what is it that you really want our listeners to remember from our discussion?
Yeah, I think I would just say whether you are parents with kids that are growing up and you're guiding them ultimately to make good decisions in their relationships, particularly romantic relationships, and then ultimately marriage or choosing a life partner, or you're single, in any of these situations, what I would say is kind of what our motto is. Relationships are of the heart. But as human beings, we have thinking processes. We make decisions. We have judgments. We have the ability to be analytic, and our head and our heart really they are designed to work together. And I would just say, whether it's in your marriage or whether it's with your kids, help them to know how to have their head and their heart really be in harmony. And that's going to empower them more than anything. It's going to empower you. It's going to empower your kids. It's very, very empowering when the head and the heart work together.
Love that. Yeah, thank you. Liz, what about you? What's your takeaway?
That's brilliant. I often say to couples, especially those who are dating, single, that there's very little you can do to compensate after marriage for choosing poorly before marriage, right? So that selection process is so key. And I can't think of a better tool than RAM, the relationship assessment model, about knowing, trusting, committing, relying, touching. It's beautiful. What about you, Dave? What's your takeaway for the day?
Previous to this, I thought the RAM, okay, it's for those who are single and it's getting to know people. But I really love the perspective and the way that, John, you've talked about today. That continues in our relationships. We continually get to know. We continually, that trust can be strengthened over time, and rely, and that commitment should be getting stronger. I love that it's not just for singles relationships, but what we've been talking about today really does apply in all relationships, as you've mentioned before, John, that RAM, that relationship attachment model does. So if you're not familiar with it, you've got to get familiar with it. You've got to go check out the resources, get the books, get the information, because John Van Epp really does offer so much great information for singles, for couples, for parents as well. So John, I can't thank you enough. Thanks again for coming and joining us on our podcast today.
It's been great to be here. I really, really appreciate it, and look forward to maybe coming back, and we could actually go really hardcore about applying that RAM to long-term relationships rather than partner selection. But we hinted at a lot of that, and so it's just very, very grateful. And I just want to say a shout out to all those wonderful people in Utah that are teaching my programs and have just been such a support. I just am so appreciative and grateful for that kind of partnership. It's been phenomenal for my life, and I hopefully been really a blessing and a benefit to those that go through the courses.
Yeah, it really has. And we hope that partnership continues for years to come. So thanks again, John. And that does it for us, my friends. Thanks for joining us again on another episode of Stronger Marriage Connection.
And remember, it's the small things that make for a stronger marriage connection. See you next time.
We'll see you. Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a few minutes to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. When you hit the like button and leave a comment, your feedback helps us improve the show. And don't forget to share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and connect with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and on Facebook at Stronger Marriage. Be sure to share with us what topics you want us to explore or what you loved about today's episode. If you want even more resources to improve your relationship connection, visit our website at strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producers Rex Polanis and Alexis Alcott and the team at Utah State University. And you, our audience, you make this show possible.